March of the year 1873, miles west of Fort Wallace, Kansas. The wind had been howling since dawn, sharp and pitiless, gnawing through the cedar-planked walls like a coyote at bone. The girl crouched inside what used to be a church, now only a ruin half swallowed by the prairie. The roof had given in years ago, and a few of the windows were boarded from the inside with whatever timber she'd found scattered nearby: a barrel lid, a broken pew, even a child's wooden sled whose paint had long faded. A piece of torn calico was wrapped tight over her head and around her throat, but her lips were cracked and her skin raw from days of windburn. She wasn't cold, not exactly just hollowed out by something worse than weather. Her youngest, a boy not quite two, slept curled against her hip under a patched woolen blanket. The other three sat in silence near the iron stove, which had no fuel to burn. There had been no fire in 4 days. She hadn't spoken since the night before the snow started, and the silence around her had thickened, feeding off her grief and their hunger. They were all thin now, their cheeks fallen in. The older two had stopped asking when Pa would come back. They understood. Children born out here tended to understand things too early. Outside, the storm had broken. The clouds thinned just enough to let through a weak, brittle light that painted everything a sick shade of yellow. The snow had turned to slush in places, and somewhere far off a hawk screamed above the buttis. She sat still, jaw clenched, watching the slush drip off the corner of the roof where the boards had split. A steady plink-plink on the mud below. Each sound felt like it chipped away at her nerves, slow and merciless. There'd been no horses left, no wagon, just her and 4 small bodies to keep alive on what dry beans remained. No word from anyone in town. No signal that someone might pass by the rutted trail that led toward the main road. Her stomach turned at the smell of the beans she'd cooked the night before, now crusted in the pot. She'd barely touched them. Her hands, stiff and red, pulled the baby closer. His little body radiated a flicker of warmth she clung to. That child had Pa's nose. The storm had taken the roof. Pa had taken the rifle and horse. She took the silence. One of the girls, the middle one, maybe 7, stirred and came close, her eyes wide and half swollen with sleep. She carried a tin cup with snow, melted down to half an inch of water. "Mama," she whispered, and that was all. The woman looked at her hollow-eyed. For a second, something passed through her face: regret, rage, shame, but then it fell still again. She took the cup, drank, and did not say thank you. Her tongue felt heavy and strange in her mouth, like it had grown too large from disuse. The door rattled, not from wind. The girl did not move. Her heart bucked hard once, then again. The cup hit the ground, rolling toward the baby's feet. Another rattle. A knock this time, deliberate, slow. She reached for the long piece of stovepipe she'd sharpened to a point weeks ago. Her fingers trembled as they closed around the cold iron. Silence again. Then the voice. "Mum." A man's voice. Slow. Careful. Southern, maybe. Or just tired. "Ma'am, I ain't looking to rob you or scare you. My horse stepped through a hole a ways back. I got no water left, and my coat's torn to hell. I swear I mean no harm." The girl stood. Her knees cracked. Her eyes flicked to her children, who now sat frozen, every breath shallow. She moved toward the door with the pipe gripped tight. Outside, the wind stirred again, lifting bits of ash-colored snow into the air like ghosts shaken from sleep. "Please," the man said. She opened the door an inch. He stood with both hands up, unarmed boots caked in mud. His beard was patchy, his coat ripped beneath one arm. His face was lined but young. Their eyes met. She did not speak, but something in her face changed. Something finally shifted. The stranger waited, not stepping forward. The wind pulled at his hat, and he caught it with one hand, lowering his head in a respectful, sort of way that made him seem smaller, less of a threat. She kept the pipe in her hand as she opened the door wider. "Just for water," he said. "That's all." She nodded once. A short, sharp gesture, then stepped aside. He came in slow. His boots left dark prints in the melted snow that pooled at the threshold. The children watched from the shadows like half-wild things. He looked at them then, at her, and said nothing. She pointed to the bucket in the corner. He crouched beside it, hands trembling, and drank straight from the ladle like a man who hadn't tasted clean water in days. Only when he sat back, eyes closed, chest rising with something like relief, did she lower the pipe. No one spoke. She returned to her corner, pulled the baby close again. The others huddled near. The wind outside had faded to a whisper. He glanced around the ruined church, then looked at her. "You all alone out here?" Still, she didn't answer. He nodded, as if that told him enough. "My name's Elijah Van," he said after a moment. "Used to ride dispatch for the army out near Fort Larned. Then freight. Then less steady things." He paused, scratching at his jaw. "Was headed south when my horse found a hole in the ground and threw a shoe." No answer. He looked at the pot on the stove, the broken window, the patched-up walls. "You're not waiting on anyone, are you?" That stirred her. She blinked slow, then gave the faintest shake of her head. He looked away. "Didn't think so." The oldest child, a girl maybe 10, leaned in close to her mother's arm. She whispered something. The woman bent, listened. Her voice broke the silence, then hoarse and dry. "Beans. You can have some." He turned, surprised. The girl moved to the stove, lifted the lid, stirred what little was left. "Thank you," he said. The woman didn't answer again. Her eyes drifted to the crack in the roof where light filtered in. She was not thinking of him, not fully. He was just a figure in a room that had held ghosts long before he walked in. Her mind had gone back to another wind-blown night 3 weeks past, when her husband had packed the horse with the last of the jerky and flour, said he'd head west for help. He hadn't said goodbye to the children. He hadn't looked back. She'd watched from the steps as he rode into the blue-gray dusk, that worn brown coat hunched over the saddle horn. She'd known he wouldn't return. That part had died before he disappeared. But she remembered as she sat there now how he used to hum to the baby at night when he thought she was asleep. How he'd traced the edge of her collarbone with one finger just before sleep took them both. And then how that same hand had struck her once during a winter fight. Over whiskey. Over words, better left unsaid. She'd forgiven it at the time, or thought she had. But the wound stayed just beneath the skin. So now, here she was, alone. 4 children, no food worth counting, and a stranger with a tired face sipping cold beans by the fireless stove. She looked at him again. He caught her glance, said nothing. She didn't expect him to stay, but part of her, some tiny foolish part, wanted to ask what he'd seen, who he was when he wasn't starving, whether he too had once waited for someone who never came back. The sun dipped lower. The room went gold, then gray. She pulled the children close and watched the light fade from the walls. And when Elijah asked if he could sleep by the door, just for the night, she nodded. Not out of trust, just out of the kind of tired that softens even fear. If this felt like more than a story, subscribe and keep writing. The wind was quiet come morning, the kind of stillness that didn't last long out here. It made her uneasy. Elijah stirred, first rising stiff from the dirt floor where he'd curled against the door. His coat was draped over his legs and frost rimmed the edges. He stood slow, mindful not to startle the children who still slept bunched together like pups. She was already awake, sitting upright against the wall, her face hollow in the weak morning light. He nodded to her. She said nothing. He walked outside without asking. She watched him through a crack in the door. He bent near the horse well, what remained of it. The animal stood hobbled, favoring one leg. Elijah ran his hands down its side, whispering something low, almost tender. Then he came back in holding a broken horseshoe and a hunk of rawhide. I can patch him enough to ride to town, he said, voice hoarse from cold. Might take the better part of the day. Then a full day's walk back. If you still want help. She looked at him then. Really looked. He wasn't like her husband. There was no swagger in him. No promise of more than he had. His clothes were plain, his boots cracked. His beard grew uneven, not for style, but because he'd lost the habit of shaving. But something about the way he spoke, plain patient, told her he was not a liar. She nodded once. You got a name? He asked. She hesitated. Then Mara. The word came low, as if she'd forgotten how it sounded. All right, Mara, he said. I'll go as far as Wallace. Might be a rail cart due in by tomorrow night. I'll ask after a doctor. Maybe someone with supplies. Bring back what I can. He turned set to work and did not speak again. That day, she let the children help. The oldest girl gathered snow to boil for water. The second swept ash into a pile with a dry branch. Mara watched them, then stepped outside herself. The sun was sharp, bouncing off the crusted snow like sparks. Her breath smoked the air as she stood and watched Elijah shape the rawhide around the horse's hoof mouth set tight in concentration. She picked up a broken board and began patching a hole in the wall near the stove. He noticed, but didn't comment. They worked like that, quiet, together. As the light waned, Elijah stood, wiped his hands on his trousers, and led the horse a few paces. It limped, but held. Should hold till the ridge, he said. Mara nodded. She took a biscuit from her coat pocket, hard as stone, but still food, and handed it to him. He accepted it without a word, ate half, then passed the rest to the oldest boy. That moment stopped her, not because he shared it, but because the boy took it without looking at her first. That had been her husband's legacy, fear in their eyes before every action. Now they looked at this man like he might just be a man. Nothing more. Nothing to dread. As Elijah mounted up, Mara stepped close. Not near enough to touch, but close enough for him to hear her over the creak of saddle leather. If you don't come back, we'll make do, she said. Her voice was rough, but steady. He met her eyes. I'll come back. Then he turned the horse and rode east into the last gold light of the day. Mara stood at the edge of the church ruins until his figure blurred into the land. Then she turned back inside, her hands shaking a little from the cold. Or maybe something else. He returned 2 nights later, just after dusk, his coat stiff with dust and cold horse breathing ragged beneath him. Mara had not let herself expect it. She'd kept busy splitting what dry wood she could find, boiling roots and cornmeal, rationing even the broth. The children had grown quieter, watching her with the same steady gaze they gave the sky before storms. When she heard the horse's hooves crunch the frozen earth, she stood still by the fireless stove, afraid to hope. Then he stepped inside, shoulders bent, face chapped red. He dropped a canvas sack near the door and said, Got beans, some coffee lard, 2 blankets. No doctor. But there's a midwife said she'd come if she could find a ride out. She didn't answer right away. She just crouched by the sack and started sorting through what he brought. Her hands moved quick, precise. She didn't cry. Horse is done, he added. Won't last another trip. I'm staying here a while. If you don't mind. She glanced at the children. The baby slept, cheeks flushed. The others had crowded behind the pew and were peeking around it. You can sleep in the back, she said. He nodded, took his coat off, laid it on the floor near the wall, and eased down like a man who hadn't slept indoors in weeks. That night, they didn't talk, but she boiled beans in lard and split the pot evenly between them. The next morning, Elijah woke early and went out without a word. She found him dragging deadwood up from the dry creek bed, arms and back straining under the weight. He didn't ask where to put it, just split it and stacked it by the stove. She watched him a long time, face unreadable. "You could leave," she said finally. He drove the axe into the stump and leaned on it. "I could." He didn't say more. Days passed like that. Slow, rough, quiet. He fixed what he could, sealed the roof with oilcloth, mended the shutters with rope and canvas, dug a hole out back for waste. She taught the oldest boy how to boil water without scorching the bottom of the pot. Showed the middle girl how to wrap cloth tight around a bleeding hand. Elijah sat with the baby some evenings, humming under his breath. She didn't trust it at first. She kept waiting for some crack to show anger, self-pity, drunkenness. But it didn't come. One morning, after a long silence between them, he asked, "Your husband he leave?" Or she looked out across the plain. The wind had started up again, chasing dust devils along the ridge. "He left," she said. "Took the last of the good things." He nodded once. "Mine died." She turned. "Smallpox. Took the boy too. Back in Texas. 5 years ago now." He said it quiet, like it wasn't the first time, but never got easier to say. She didn't offer comfort. Just stood beside him, the air brittle between them. They worked until their hands were raw and their feet cracked. And in the evenings when the children slept, they sometimes sat by the fire and passed a tin cup of coffee back and forth. Not because they needed to talk, just because it felt like company. He carved a whistle for the baby, taught the older boy how to oil the latch on the door. And once in the soft blue dark before sleep, Mara said his name, not in fear, not in warning, just said it. "Elijah." He turned toward her, and she held his gaze, the wind curling through the rafters like a song that had waited a long, long time to be heard. It was near the end of April when the first rider came. They saw the dust long before the figure took shape, a single man on a tall bay gelding, cutting fast across the low plain, heading straight for the church. Elijah stood out, front hand on his belt knife, though he didn't draw. Mara stepped into the doorway, the youngest on her hip, the others crowding her legs. The rider pulled up hard, a clean-shaven man in a dark coat, wide-brimmed hat low over his eyes. He didn't smile. Mara hard. She didn't answer. The man looked past Elijah as if he weren't there. "Name's Winton. Your brother sent me. Says you're running wild out here. Sent a wagon to bring you and the children back to Dodge." Elijah didn't move. Mara's lips parted dry. "He sent you." "That's right." Winton's voice was flat. "Says it ain't right, a woman with no man and no plan keeping children in a ruin. Says he'll take the boy, raise him proper. Girls can stay at the mission school. They'll be fed." Elijah stepped forward. "They're fed now." Winton's gaze flicked to him. "And who are you?" "Just helping." Winton snorted. "That's so well, this isn't your say." He turned back to Mara. "He'll be here tomorrow. If you care to argue, you can do it then." He turned his horse, spurred once, and was gone in a trail of dust. That night, Mara didn't eat. She sat with her knees to her chest near the door, her arms wrapped around the baby. The others had been quiet since Winton left, through the oldest had asked softly if they had to go. No, Mara had said, but she wasn't sure who she meant to convince. Elijah didn't speak for a long time. "Then you don't owe them a damn thing." She looked at him hard. "He's my brother. He gave you up." She stood, stepped outside. The wind cut low across the land, carrying the scent of dust and cottonwood. She looked toward the hills. "My brother thinks women are only safe when they're behind a man," she said. "He thinks this place is filth. Thinks my children would do better in a whitewashed room with sermons and rules. Thinks I'll crawl back if he offers me food." "You won't," Elijah said. "No," she said. but I might lose them anyway. He stood, walked to her. Not close, not touching, just near enough that she could hear him breathe. You can stay. We'll make it right. Together. She turned. Why? His mouth worked before words came. Because I see you. You don't run. You don't lie. You don't flinch when it gets cold. Her eyes searched his face, searching for the selfishness, the hunger, the cruelty. She found none of it. Only the hard edge of truth and something like hope underneath. But in the early light, she still lay awake. The baby fussed against her ribs. She knew Winton would come, and she knew he'd brought the law with him before. Elijah slept by the door, knife and rifle within reach. She looked toward him, the rough shape of his shoulder lit by the coals. A choice sat between them now. Not just hers. They heard the wagon before they saw it. Early light, cool and brittle, broke across the flat as wheels crunched through frost-hardened mud. Elijah was already outside, rifle slung calm in the shoulders, but sharp around the eyes. Mara stood behind him, her hair braided down her back, a clean apron tied around her waist. The children stayed inside as told. The wagon crested the rise. 2 men rode up front, Winton, and a deputy from Dodge known by the star pinned loose on his chest. A third man sat in back, the preacher, who ran the mission school. The horses slowed to a stop. Winton climbed down first, confident and casual. He looked older than she remembered, rounder, more polished, but his eyes were the same. Judgmental and cold. Mara, he said, like it was a favor. She didn't speak. I brought the pastor. The children can ride safe with him. You'll come with me. Sheriff made it official. You're not fit to raise them alone. The deputy didn't meet her eyes. I've food, blankets, and a clean room at the parsonage, the preacher offered. We'll treat them kind. She didn't move. Elijah stepped forward, calm. She's not going. Winton's mouth curled. You think anyone out here will take your word? I've been feeding them, working this place back to life. And she's stronger than all of us. You're a drifter, Winton snapped. You'll leave like the last one. No, Mara said. It was the first time she'd raised her voice. It came flat and hard, like something hammered out on an anvil. I buried that man in the winter of his leaving, she said. I won't explain it to you. You think this shack is a home? Winton said. You think starving out here is better than a church roof in order? Mara walked past Elijah, then out into the open. Her boots sank into the frost. She pointed toward the children's lean toes, the food stacked in burlap sacks, the firewood Elijah had cut, the shelter they had mended with bare hands. I don't need your roof, she said, and I won't give them to you. The deputy stepped forward. Elijah lifted the rifle, not high, but enough. You'll have to drag her, he said, and you'll have to shoot me first. The silence after that was long. Wind stirred the sagebrush and the creak of leather shifted under the deputy's weight. Winton's jaw worked, but he said nothing. The preacher cleared his throat, uneasy. She's not insane, Elijah said. She's just alive, and she means to stay that way. The deputy looked at Mara, then really looked, at the cracked hands, the raw courage in her face. He lowered his hand from his belt. Winton turned, swearing under his breath, and climbed back on the wagon. The preacher didn't follow. As the wheels turned away, Mara stood still until the wagon became a shadow in the distance. Then she went inside and let the children touch her arms and ask if they were staying. Yes, she said, kneeling beside them. We are. That night, Elijah boiled water for coffee. She brought out a small tin box from beneath the floorboards. Inside were 2 rings, one hers, one her mother's. She set it beside the fire and said nothing, but he looked at it for a long while and nodded. Spring pressed on. The earth softened. The creek filled with meltwater and wildflowers pushed through the dirt like stubborn little signs of grace. The children grew louder again. They played in the sun, dirty and alive, chasing shadows and carving shapes into the mud with sticks. Mara laughed sometimes. Not much, but enough. Elijah stayed. He built a second room off the church with scavenged timber, nailed the boards tight-lined the inside with burlap and wool. He taught the oldest boy to set a snare, taught the second to mend boots. The girls learned to sew what could be sewn and patch what couldn't. He and Mara worked side by side most days, planting a small patch of corn near the well, bartering with wagoners who passed through the ridge, rebuilding the roof beam by beam. Sometimes they'd sit quiet under the stars, passing a mug of warm chicory back and forth. And sometimes he'd hum low and tuneless. The night she put the ring on his palm, he said nothing at first, but he held her hand afterward. And that said plenty. They didn't talk of love in the way books might. They spoke in firewood, stacked high before a storm, in a warm blanket laid gently across sleeping children, and sitting up with the youngest through fever without needing to be asked. One morning in June, Mara pressed his hand to her belly. Her eyes held his. He didn't speak, just closed his fingers over hers and nodded slow. When the midwife finally arrived by rail weeks later, she found the place cleaner than expected. She stayed 3 nights, checked the children, gave advice about the baby on the way, and left with biscuits in her apron and a smile she didn't try to hide. The church was never a church again, but it was something else. A home, maybe. One warm evening, Elijah carved a plank and nailed it above the door. It read simply "Heart," and Mara stood beside him while the sun sank low, her hand resting over the child, not yet born, her hair undone and catching the gold light. In the field nearby, the children's laughter echoed through the dusk. The wind was soft now, not cruel, not cutting, just there, moving the grass, brushing against them like something alive. Mara looked out across the land, her voice quiet. "We'll be all right." Elijah took her hand, calloused and warm. They didn't need to say the rest. They already were. The frontier is wide, and we've only crossed the first mile.